Hi, welcome to the Beauty Authority. I'm Tatiana Bido, Director of Aesthetic Content for NewBeauty. And today we're talking about GLP-1 medications. And joining me today is Dr. Spencer Nadolsky, obesity specialist and co-host of the Doctors Who Lift podcast. Hi, Dr. Nadolsky.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much. And you're such a trusted resource for NewBeauty on all things GLP-1. So thanks for coming. But
Yeah,
first, let's talk about what is a GLP-1. I think even though they're so popular, a lot of people still don't understand what the medication is or how it works.
yeah. Quick brief GLP-1 or glucagon like peptide 1 is a natural hormone that comes from our intestines after we eat, specifically carbohydrates. It helps our pancreas make more insulin to help blood sugar get into our cells. These GLP-1 medicines, though, are what are called receptor agonists. They mimic our own GLP-1, but they were designed in such a way that our bodies don't break them down. Our own natural GLP-1 gets broken down within a minute or two. These receptor agonists or mimetics, analogs, or whatever people would call them, they're designed so our bodies can't break it down. So the scientists have figured out ways to make them stick around longer and longer in our body and have different effects and hit the receptors in certain ways. So that's the gist of what they are. They basically mimic our natural hormone, but with much more powerful effects.
And I know they do different things like there's semaglutide and there's tirzepatide, but what is the action that is causing the weight loss?
Yeah. So originally they were studied for type 2 diabetes because of that, what's called the incretin effect. People would, the studies they did back in the 50s and 60s, they'd inject glucose into the veins versus having people drink glucose. And we found out that people drinking the glucose, they had a bigger insulin response than injecting. So it was some sort of intestinal secretion of some hormone, incretin effect. So that's how they originally were studied. But there were signs in rodents and animal models that like, hey, it looks like the GLP-1 is associated with some appetite effects and helping eating behavior. So the first one that was FDA approved 2005, 2006 range, exenatide or Byetta, had to inject it twice a day. It had a small, tiny little bit of weight loss effect. The new one was called Victoza after that, or liraglutide, and that had a little bit more of an effect. That was in 2009-ish. 2014, though, they actually increased that liraglutide dose from the diabetes dose at 1.8 milligrams up to 3 because they saw, like, look, this can help people lose weight. But back then, this liraglutide, it was okay. Helped people lose maybe like 7 or 8% total body weight, and I'll go into what the newer ones achieve, but that's somewhere around a third, a half, or a third of what the newest ones do. So the way these things work for weight loss specifically, there are receptors in the brain that control eating behavior. And one of the things you hear is that, like, okay, if you're struggling with your weight, you may struggle not going for a second helping of whatever you ate, even if it's a healthy, quote unquote, meal. So whatever, broccoli and lean protein chicken, whatever the standard thing with brown rice is a classic kind of
Right.
healthy healthy meal. But people are like, "Man," people that don't struggle with their weight, they feel good afterwards. While people that struggle with their obesity, the thought is that there's this dysregulation of your appetite. And so the medicine hits some receptors in various parts of the brain that then have downstream effects. So not just at that level where it goes, but it hits the receptors and propagates and extends to other parts of the brain that control feeding behavior. And so it's not just hunger. So thinking about like, I want to have a second helping, another serving, another plate. You
Right.
don't want that, number one. Number two, or that's how they're supposed to work anyway. Not everybody responds, but we'll get into that. But the other thing is our cravings. So like, I don't know, I like chips, salty, crunchy things at night.
Right.
Patients talk about not wanting those things anymore. So the thought is that there is an effect on the reward center. So, like the wanting of food that when you're not even hungry necessarily, everybody craves things. So, boom, the medicines help there. But the third thing, and this is like what everybody talks about, is food noise,
Yeah.
different from hunger or satiety, that feeling where you're like, I feel good after a meal. I don't want to eat anymore. You're satiated. And different from cravings where it's specific food. Like I'm craving chocolate. I'm craving a donut. I'm craving chips. I'm craving pizza, that type of thing.
Right.
Food noise, what the patients describe, and they didn't know they had it before until they took the medicine. they go, You know what? I'm not even thinking about food anymore. It used to be I just get done with a meal or I'm halfway through a meal thinking about, okay, is there going to be enough food for me later or what am I going to eat next? And not anything specific. So the big thing where I think these things work really well is that because if you're just constantly thinking, there's no way you're going to be able to be successful with just a diet and exercise by itself. Because yeah, you can eat fewer calories, but if you're just thinking about food, there's only so long you're not going to eat that food. That's the in the animal models and human models, that's where the biggest effect is. These medicines aren't fat burners. They don't just melt fat off your body. Not yet.
Right.
There are some in the pipeline that we can talk about that might might make the case for that. There's some thought that maybe they help you not lower your metabolic rate, your metabolism as much as if you were to just do diet and exercise by itself. That's debated, but the biggest is appetite.
Yeah, and doesn't I'm not sure if both of them, semaglutide and tirzepatide, do the same as far as slowing the gastric emptying process. But is that a factor also that you're fuller longer because everything's moving a little bit slower?
Yeah, that might be part of it. So fullness, when people know this, if they eat a huge salad that doesn't have much in it, they just eat a bunch of lettuce, they'll feel full in their tummy, but they won't feel satiated.
Right. Yes.
So there may be a component to it where they feel full, and people who've had like bariatric surgery might know this, where in the beginning you get some of that satiety effect from like a bariatric surgery, and there's different types, but over time they're not feeling that satiety as much, and the satiety is really like the hormonal component of it. So some of the gastric emptying slowing, you might get that fullness, but over time that actually goes down. So when everybody's like, "Oh, I'm having stomach paralysis," people are talking about stomach paralysis.
Yes.
It's a known effect from the medicine to slow things down, but over time it starts to go back up a little bit. Not maybe not back to normal. So it may be a component, but a lot of it's just in the brain.
And then you mentioned with the liraglutide, there was a lesser percentage of weight loss associated with that earlier drug. What percentage of weight loss is associated with the current class of GLP-1s that we have?
Yeah, so think about diet and exercise on a big population level and a randomized trial, like gold standard intensive diet and exercise. We're looking at like 5-6% total body weight loss. That doesn't mean like someone could lose, a third or half of their weight. It's just very rare.
Mm,
So you move to that liraglutide, you get up 7 and 8%. You kind of move the needle a little bit without necessarily being intensive about the diet and exercise. Semaglutide around 15 or so percent. That was the big, what's called the step one trial in 2021 when everybody's like, this is a game changer because
right.
we just doubled what we saw with liraglutide. There were some earlier drugs that we saw about 10%, something, it's a phentermine plus topiramate combo,
Mhm.
some side effects, so it wasn't used as much, but it's not a bad combo. But now we're at 15, and bariatric surgery is around like 25-30%. So now instead of going from diet and exercise 5-6% all the way to just get surgery, now we have this thing right in the middle that's like, oh, this is a good option. But tirzepatide,
Right.
those studies came out a year or two after the semaglutide, and then we're like 20-21 or so percent total body weight loss. So now all of a sudden we're just adding another 30% on top of what we saw with semaglutide, which was already amazing.
Which is huge for anyone who's tried and failed and tried and failed and tried and failed over the course of their lifetime to lose weight and maintain the weight loss. So, it's a significant number.
Yeah, it's I mean, the patients finally have hope, and a lot of them, what they'll say is like, "Are you sure this is going to work?" And when it
Right.
starts working, they're like, I don't believe it's true because I've done everything and nothing's ever worked." So and they're like, "Wow." They get to, a year and their weight's still off, and it's just a different feeling.
A lot of critics will say, we don't know how the medication's going to, if it's safe using it long term. But a lot of the experts I've spoken to say we do have this patient population of diabetes patients who've been using it. So is there a different safety profile for a patient on the medication who has diabetes and someone who doesn't?
Yeah, it's actually a really good question because I bring this up when people are like, "Let's just put this stuff in the water," and you could, and so I'm like, "Okay," because I joke around like I'm a GLP-1 shill, like I don't make kickbacks or anything. So the thought is, I can't imagine that the risks are necessarily higher. It's that when you start getting someone with less clinical upside, the risks become more magnified, if that makes sense. So, like with
Hmm.
somebody with type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease, these things lower the risk of heart attacks. But, you do see these rare potential risks. And again, some of the stuff's not even in the trials that we see. You see it coming out in this post-market surveillance of observational data like, oh, we're seeing kind of cases of this, and then they have to do these analyses to see if it actually is true, and
Right.
it's really hard to know, but the risks are probably similar. It's just that those rare side effects that we hear about that aren't even in the trial data become more magnified because there wasn't as much of a clinical upside. So here's what I think. These medicines have been out for 2 decades. Different medicines, back then it was exenatide or Byetta, then liraglutide, and there was a few other ones. There was dulaglutide and a few other, some of them actually, had come off the market, not due to any issues with them, but because they didn't have such a strong weight loss effect that they're like, "Well, alright, nobody's buying this drug," even though,
Right.
some of them even helped lower cardiovascular disease, but there wasn't weight loss, so people are like, "Forget it, I don't care about heart attacks, I wanna lose some weight." So what I think is these drugs extremely, extremely safe, other than these rare side effects, a very good safety profile. The risks and benefits always have to be discussed with the patient. Like, hey, if you're not going to have a ton of clinical benefit, there are some risks. So does that mean those rare risks may start outweighing the clinical benefit? Hard to
Yeah.
say because I made a video about this all about I basically argued against the idea that everybody should be on it. Then I
Okay.
argued for it. And the way that I talked about it is that like, look, I think at some point these are going to be used for like weight gain prevention.
Hmm.
Everybody's like, well, we got people saying we got to change our environment. Yeah, we should change our environment. I just don't think it's going to happen. So I think we're going to use technology to basically prevent. So imagine a family with a lot of obesity in the family and type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease. The child yet is in their early 20s and they're starting to get a little bit heavier. And you know that if they get heavier, they're going to start developing those things too. They don't meet the clinical FDA guidelines yet, but you go, let's throw a low dose on them and just prevent that weight gain from happening. I think that's what we're going to see. We're going to see it in binge eating disorders. We're going to see it in alcohol use disorders. We're going to see it in inflammatory diseases. Needs to be studied though to know because what are the doses going to be? Is it fine with low doses and that type of thing?
Well, right now, a lot of people are saying they're using it for longevity and microdosing,
Yeah.
and it's going to be the drug of the future. But one of my questions is what about the benefits? Because there are, like, as you mentioned, there are all of these side benefits from taking, including like reduced inflammation, reduced heart disease, reduced risk of dementia. What are some of the benefits people should know?
Yeah, so right now it's like, okay, we know this is going to help in those with type 2 diabetes. We know probably if you have a high risk of cardiovascular disease or cardiovascular disease itself, you're going to prevent on a population level another heart attack if you had one or prevent the first one. You'll prevent strokes, that type of thing. That's if you're high risk. If you have obesity and cardiovascular disease, we have seen it already that we're going to prevent another heart attack, stroke, what are called major adverse cardiovascular events. And then beyond that, we have an indication for obstructive sleep apnea, whether it helps beyond the weight loss, debated, probably a lot of the weight loss because a lot of the mass around the neck that will have an issue with airway obstruction just got approved. Semaglutide just got approved for fatty liver. Likely benefit there. There's likely a benefit in preventing chronic kidney disease. Now, where people are debating is like longevity. Well, how are we going to measure that? Well, that's going to take a long time to see people not die like
Right.
who are healthy. There was a signal in this study that's coming out. The top line results showed in those with tirzepatide. Manjaro is the brand name for type 2 diabetes. And in those patients at high risk for cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes, there was looked like potentially a mortality benefit there. But will that extrapolate? Will that extend to people like me and you, pretty healthy
Right.
people, and help us live longer regardless? Maybe. I don't know. Anecdotally, I have a lot of patients with like inflammatory bowel disease, so things like Crohn's, ulcerative colitis. I have patients with psoriatic arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, and a lot of these people are on like biologic um, uh, medicines, Humira, and those types of things, Skyrizi. And what they say is that those kind of helped, but that it wasn't till tirzepatide where it's like boom, symptoms completely went away.
They're also seeing a lot of success with people who have skin conditions because the inflammation is helping with these chronic skin conditions long
That's what
term.
I think. That's why. So basically, I like to just kind of temper the hype, but at the same time, I'm like, it's hard not to just go, whatever. These things are going to be. I think everybody's going to be on them, but I like to caution and say, like, look, we don't have the data yet, but this is what my prediction is. That's
Right.
how I do it.
And let's talk about a hot topic. I just wrote about this and you were one of my sources. I know you did your own episode about GLP-1 and vision loss. Is there
Yeah.
any truth to this, rumor or headline that's been spreading that GLP-1s cause vision loss?
Yeah, so there are different types of potential issues that people have thought may come from these medicines. For example, if you have diabetic retinopathy, could it worsen that acutely if you start taking them? Can you lower sugar so quickly it can worsen vision? But the study that came out last year, yeah, I did the podcast on it with a retina specialist. It was this. It was the type of blindness of this non-arteritic anterior ischemic optic neuropathy. It was seen in semaglutide and type 2 diabetes. And now this wasn't a trial, it was just looking back. And the problem is when you have these what are called retrospective observational studies, you ideally take the same groups, split them up, and randomize one to a placebo and the active group. And then we just see what happens. That's the
Mhm.
ideal gold standard. And everybody's blinded to what they're on. The scientists, the patients, they don't know what they're on. But in these retrospective studies, you got to go back and look at people taking it, and then you have to somehow match it to people that weren't taking it. There's lots of what are called confounders and things that completely change. So last year there was a study looking at that and showed it was extremely rare, but a small uptick in this type of blindness. So basically like a curtain falling over you in one eye. And my retina specialist buddy was talking about, like, yeah, the risk factor is if you don't get enough blood to your eye, the optic nerve, that can happen. If your blood pressure goes too low, the medicines can lower your
Right.
blood pressure if you're losing a lot of weight. Then a lot of these people are on blood pressure medicine. They may have sleep apnea. So at night, they're not getting enough oxygen, that type of thing. But the newest analysis this year, they did it. There didn't seem to be a risk.
Right.
There's been zero signal for that. I'm reassured by the new data that's out. If anything, you just make sure people's blood pressure doesn't go too low, which can actually happen even if they're not on blood pressure. So I try to monitor that closely so they don't go to because you can get dizzy and stuff when standing up. There's
So
other
we're not all gonna go blind.
no, if there's a risk, it's extremely rare. And
And then let's talk a little bit about muscle mass. And as you're losing weight, is the medication causing the muscle loss? Is this a risk that patients should be concerned about?
yeah, no, I'm not concerned about it. I'm doing research in it right now. We're publishing some data out of our clinic about this. I have my chief science officer is literally a body composition renowned researching expert, and where we are doing DEXA scans and looking at this. The gist is that the medicines aren't catabolic themselves. They aren't eating away at your muscle. It's the first time unless you have bariatric surgery, have a way to reduce your calorie intake consistently. So if you're in a consistent calorie deficit, meaning you're eating fewer calories than you burn, you're likely going to lose muscle and what's called fat-free mass or lean mass. So bone, muscle, that type of thing. And when you combine it all together, it looks like very similar rates if you were to look at like bariatric surgery or diet. There was a small signal in semaglutide specifically that looked like maybe a tiny little bit more,
Mm.
but nobody knows if it's muscle. The reason it's trouble, there's troubles like really figuring out what the cause is here is that DEXA scans, the way they did them, you can't look at muscle directly. You would need to do MRIs and ultrasounds and things like that to look at muscle. So on a DEXA scan, the way that they did
Mhm.
fluid, water, like if somebody got dehydrated, it would look like they lost muscle. So I'm not worried about muscle loss. We just published a case series and have seen people just completely retain most, if not all, and even gained muscle while taking the medicines, as long as they're lifting
As
weights.
long as you're moving and lifting weights
Yeah.
and yeah,
Protein's a distant second, but sufficient protein's up there, but lifting weights is by far the most important. And not everybody wants to lift weights. And like the thing that drives me nuts is like, okay, let's scare everybody about this muscle mass loss. They couldn't even go out their front door and walk around the neighborhood. Now they can walk.
right,
Who cares if they lost some muscle? Now they're actually mobile and physically functional. So like it's missing the forest for the trees type of thing.
right. And what's the biggest misconception you hear from just anyone about GLP-1?
Probably the biggest misconception is that they're cheating, like
Yes.
that they're a band-aid.
I hate that narrative.
And the the reality is, and they're not fixing the root cause. I'm like, what's the root cause? Well, one of the big causes of weight gain is a dysregulated appetite.
Yeah.
You're like, well, did people have a dysregulated appetite back in the 20s and 30s or whatever? And it's like, no. What happens is that yes, our environment causes us all to kind of slowly gain weight,
Yeah.
and that weight gain then dysregulates through inflammatory factors and changes in our brain so that when they try to lose weight with diet and exercise and make a conscious effort to do it, their body fights back in terms of ramping up more appetite. So it makes it just very difficult. So the medicines come in and basically block those signals.
Well, we had a completely different lifestyle in the 20s and 30s, and we had access to completely different types of foods, and we didn't use as many preservatives. And I mean, you could go on and on. That's one of my least favorite narratives is that you're cheating or you're taking, a quick fix. I mean, anyone who's struggled with their weight for their lifetime knows that there's no quick fix. And that's another question I have for you, Dr. Nadolsky. Is this a medication that once you're on it, you will need to be on it for the rest of your life to be successful, similar to like a blood pressure medication?
Yeah, most people, when you look at those with obesity or overweight, most people will, if they stop the medicine, will regain the weight. This doesn't mean all people. So what you'll hear some groups saying, it's just a short-term thing. You get off of it. It helps you with your habits, blah, 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 blah. Other people, obesity doctors would like, nope, this is a medicine for good. The truth is that yes, most people likely will require at least some form or fashion, a low dose of the stuff in the long run to keep the weight off that they lost with it. But we see probably around 10-15% of people, at least within the short term, like 1 year, can keep all their weight off when they come off the medicine. Whether that's true up to 10-20 years after they stop it, I can't say. But I would expect if you go on it, I would expect to be on it long term. I mean, same thing. It's just like you said, blood pressure. So you go into the doctor, you're trying lifestyle, blood pressure is still high.
Yeah.
Doctor says, all right, let's put you on a blood pressure medicine. And you go down to a good blood pressure. And the doctor would say, all right, now that you're a good blood pressure, let's take you off the blood pressure medicine. Some people can come off. So, like, if there are things that the person was able to do lifestyle wise that was able to keep the blood pressure down without the medicine, it happens. We do see it. And we do see it with obesity and overweight. But in general, most people will have to stay on it.
And what about the future of GLP-1 medications? If you are going to be on it for a long time, what do we have to look forward to? What types of different medications are coming down the pike?
Yeah, I mean, this is where things get pretty insane because so we see what a GLP-1 receptor by itself does, receptor agonist. So semaglutide is the most well-known one by itself. Then we add on this GIP component, glucose-dependent insulinotropic polypeptide. Doesn't really matter, it's a mouthful, but, like, that GIP component, is that the part that's actually making the backbone of the GLP-1 a little bit more powerful? Is it additive? Lots of debate there. Then they're adding on their that's a dual agonist or a twincretin, co-agonist, as some people would say. Now we're looking at triple agonist, so that's what everybody's talking about, retatrutide. Some people call it retatrutide, whatever, doesn't matter, tomato,
Yeah.
tomato, but this is where they put GLP-1 with GIP, so like tirzepatide, and then the peptide also hits another receptor called glucagon, and it's thought that this extra component actually may increase energy expenditure or how many calories you burn. while also having direct targets in the liver in terms of mobilizing fat tissue, and then probably an extra appetite component. I've
So does that mean we're just gonna get we're gonna svelte?
I mean, I'm kinda scared people are gonna turn into skeletons with this medicine. Yeah, so it's I've had patients come from the clinical trials. I have DMs from people in the clinical trials, and you hear about the gray market stuff. I don't recommend anybody do the gray market stuff, but people are doing it all the time. I wouldn't take it. I wouldn't recommend it, but the patients that come from the clinical trials, and then I put them on tirzepatide, which is super powerful,
Mhm.
they're like, "Oh my gosh, this doesn't even compare." I'm like, "Oh my god."
That's how powerful retatrutide is going to be
Yeah.
once we have it.
Yes,
Yeah.
and the metabolic effects, so the LDL cholesterol and all these things are just plummeting. They have to do every time you add on a new component and it's hitting another receptor, then you have to start all over with all the trials again because
Yeah.
we we're very sure that if you have a GLP-1 receptor agonist, most likely it's gonna be safe unless for some reason that peptide you didn't know it hit a receptor that was offshoot receptor of some sort. Now we're pretty sure the same thing with GLP-1 and GIP. But glucagon's another completely another thing. I'm excited because that one is just gonna start melting fat off people. Yeah, bariatric surgery level weight loss.
Well, I can't wait to see what's next. We're in a whole new world with our GLP-1 tools. So, thank you so much for coming and shedding some light on this topic. I could talk to you for another 30, 40 minutes about this. It's my
Anytime.
favorite topic. And thank you for being such a great resource for New Beauty.
You got it, anytime.
Thank you so much. Until next time.
Bye-bye.